Fast and Furious 80s, they blazed at the center of the stadium rock universe. Signed in their teens, pin-up pop stars by their early 20s, Def Leppard smashed box office records wherever they played.
We sold Detroit out faster than Led Zeppelin did. We were talking in telephone numbers now instead of like pocket money.
It wasn't such a longer time before that we were still working in factories and things like this, to all of a sudden becoming the biggest thing since sliced bread.
It was just really weird. And then multiple shows, you know, 20,000 a night, doing 3 nights in a row. It was like, whoa, where did this come from?
I'm barely out of school, barely even out of diapers, and I'm sitting up there playing drums in a grown-up business. My childhood got condensed.
Their popularity skyrocketed with the explosion of MTV. They were the first young rockers to aggressively market themselves through music videos. And unlike many hard rock bands, Def Leppard scored big with female fans.
It was great to see 60% females at the gig. You know, they scream louder, they dance, and let's be honest, there was 5 horny men on stage that are attracted to women. I was being dragged off into some bathroom by some dirty little girl in a miniskirt, you know, and that suited me fine.
Their album Pyromania sold 10 million copies. Their follow-up Hysteria sold 15 million more. On tour, Def Leppard ruled the wide, wild world of arena rock, where their popular success was matched only by their personal excess.
You know, they had carte blanche. They had everything they wanted. Plus, they had people shoving drinks in their faces, putting lines up their noses.
But I mean, they really were the party band. All these bands, you know, Metallica, Motley Crue, you know, you sit there and think they were so tough. I mean, you couldn't touch Def Leppard for it. It's just the fact they hid it really, really well.
They were on top of the world, but nothing could have prepared them for the series of tragedies that would haunt them in the years to come.
Rick's had a car crash, he's lost his arm.
It nearly died, nearly lost the other one as well.
Rick Allen had lost his limb, and soon Steve Clark would lose his life.
He never wanted to face his pain, is really what it boiled down to. He hurt too much.
You just see a friend almost deteriorating in front of your eyes, and you just feel so helpless.
And his heart was just, you know, beating, trying so hard to stay alive. But really, he was really slowly trying to kill himself.
Def Leppard's fateful journey began in Sheffield, England in 1977. Rock and roll was their chance to escape a dismal future in the steel mills.
We were so desperate to get out of that whole thing. The whole industrial aspect of Sheffield was imploding. Factories were closing down, they were falling down, and we were prepared to do anything, you know. Bank robbing, anything, than work in a factory.
Joe Elliott and Rick Savage joined musical forces with guitarist Pete Willis and drummer Tony Kenning. Joe had the energy and the drive. He became the band's engine.
Joe just happened to say, I've had this imaginary band for 2 years now, and I've even made posters of it. Great, we've already got the name, and it was like, we're off.
The spelling of their name was soon changed, ironically mimicking that of Led Zeppelin. But it was the addition of guitarist Steve Clark that helped Def Leppard create a sound all their own.
His audition was Freebird by Lynyrd Skynyrd, and he just did the whole thing on his own, and it was like, wow, this guy's amazing, and he looked great. He wore his guitar too low, he was too thin, and he had really long blonde hair, denim jacket with no shirt on, and he had a waist about this wide, and it was like, just amazing.
By day, they held down blue-collar jobs. After work, they rehearsed. For 9 long months, they rocked the night away in an abandoned spoon factory on Bramall Lane.
At one point, he got very desperate because I wanted to play so bad live, and that these guys just wanted to keep on rehearsing and polishing it and polishing it. And I said, well, I could be here in 10 years' time and still be rehearsing this bloody spoon factory. I said, Joe, if we don't do a gig soon, that's it, I'm going to find another group.
July 18th, 1978, Def Leppard's first public appearance before a crowd of 150 kids, mostly 14 and 15-year-old girls. It set the tone for the many wild years to come. But Joe Elliott wasn't content to be a local hero. He was looking for a fast track to rock and roll stardom.
It took literally 6 shows for me to turn around to everybody else and say, I don't want to do these tiny little DOS holes for the next 3 years at the hope that an A&R man spots us. There has to be a shortcut.
Joe borrowed $250 from his father to make their own record, which sold an amazing 24,000 copies. Good fortune continued to smile on the band when a 15-year-old drummer named Rick Allen saw an article entitled, Leppard Loses Skins.
I've been playing since about 9 or 10, and I was getting really fed up with the local scene. and I asked my mum to call, and she did. And I got to meet Joe and Steve.
With Rick providing the beat, Def Leppard burst onto the hard rock scene like seasoned veterans, though their average age was only 18.
For a band our age, there's nobody to touch us. That was our thing. And in fairness, I still to this day don't think there was.
By August 1979, just 12 months after their first gig, the boys signed a record deal and released their first album, On Through the Night. Touring in support of bands like AC/DC and Sammy Hagar, their high-energy stage act was an immediate hit.
They were absolutely brilliant, very colourful, very energetic. It was all action. In fact, in a way, it kind of prefigured a lot of the kind of rock bands that we got used to in the 80s. You know, in the 70s, they'd tend to stand fairly still, and Leppard clearly weren't like that. They really were like puppies just let loose.
In early 1981, Def Leppard began recording their second album, High and Dry, marking the start of their collaboration with producer Mutt Lange, a studio perfectionist who became the unofficial sixth Leppard. But trouble was brewing, and as they toured the U.S. with Ozzy Osbourne, guitarist Pete Willis found himself increasingly out of step with the band.
Pete back then would readily have gone in the ring with Mike Tyson after a few pints of beer.
With Pete Willis on the brink of self-destruction, the group spent several months in 1982 recording their third album, Hyromania. Producer Mutt Lange set the pattern for the group's workaholic recording routine, a painstaking process of rewrites and retakes.
There was a lot of tears shed on that record, and a lot of drumsticks thrown, and a lot of guitars slammed down, and a lot of, I can't sing anymore, I've lost it. Because don't do it again, do it again. The Mutt was like a train, do it again, do it again, do it again.
As the grueling Pyromania sessions wore on, Pete Willis's problems with the bottle could no longer be ignored.
I just really got out of my brains one night, you know, drank a bottle of brandy or something like that, and I was very ill. I shouldn't have gone into the studio the next morning.
And we thought he was joking. We tried the take again, and I said, Pete, listen, you're going to have to go back to Sheffield and just cool out and come back when you've actually got yourself together.
We gave him what we call a Spanish archer, elbow. He had to go.
The band picked up Londoner Phil Collen from the glam rock band Girl to replace Pete Willis.
Phil came in like a breath of fresh air. It did us the power of good. It gave us a new injection of life.
Finally, in 1983, after a long year in the studio, Pyromania was released and began a 92 for 6 months behind Michael Jackson's Thriller.
And we started that tour off playing the Marquee Club in London, which is about 800 people. We finished the tour 9 months later in Jack Murphy Stadium, which was 55,000 people or so.
With their star on the rise, the band soon fell prey to the pitfalls of life on the road. On stage, they were conquerors. Backstage, they were under siege. In 1983, with the release of their third album, Pyromania, Def Leppard had taken the rock world by storm. Soon, their success met with excess.
You go and be polite and, you know, have a beer at the bar, and then when you shut yourself away in a room, that's when you get down to the serious drinking and drug taking.
We'd be offered things, and sometimes you just have to experiment, you know. You see a little cat, see a hole in a wall, sticks his head through. Maybe a dog will bite his head off the other side, maybe not.
It was a complete hoot. I loved it. You know, me and Steve used to get into a lot of trouble, usually involving drinking girls and unusual stuff.
Steve and Phil were a team. They were a team off the stage, and they were a team on the stage.
Whereas Aerosmith had the Toxic Twins, we had the Terror Twins.
An affectionate term for the pair of them.
We never let it overtake us. We've never gone on stage incapable of playing. And Steve, even at his worst, never went on stage drunk.
By late 1983, Def Leppard had sold more than 6 million records and played to sellout crowds around the world. They retreated to Ireland to work on the follow-up album, Hysteria. But old habits died hard for these rough-and-tumble rockers.
We went through an astonishing amount of alcohol when we lived in Booterstown in Dublin. We started saving the bottles after about the 10th day because we thought it'd be funny to see what we got through. We'd had piled up in the corner of one room 170-odd bottles of vodka, 150-odd bottles of scotch, and just a mountain of beer cans.
For me, it was I had to stop completely. I couldn't do the kind of social drinker, glass of wine thing. I tried that in the past, and it was glass of wine, bottle of wine. By the end of the week, it was Jack Daniels, and so I quit completely.
When Phil stopped drinking, Steve lost his drinking partner and felt more isolated.
Stopping wasn't even on his agenda.
We'd been together long enough to notice that, you know, there was a little too much drinking involved, and I went to the band and I approached them about it, and I said, you know, I think Steve's really got a drinking problem. And they just passed it off like, oh, you know, Steve's always liked a bit of the drop and you're just having marriage problems.
In mid-1984, the band went back into the studio to record Hysteria. When recording paused for the Christmas break, they returned home for the holidays. On New Year's Eve, drummer Rick Allen and his girlfriend Miriam Berenson were driving near Rick's parents' home in rural England.
When I was driving down the road in the Corvette, this red Alfa Romeo came screaming around the corner. He slowed up to the point where I started having to slow up. I tried to pass him, and every time I tried to pass him, this guy would speed up again. I lost my temper to the point where I don't even remember going around the corner. I guess as I rolled this car, the seatbelt was the thing that actually took my arm off. Because I remained conscious, I tensed to the point where I almost didn't bleed at all.
Luckily for Rick, two people who lived nearby were Doreen Billington, a retired nurse, and Tony Beavis, an off-duty police officer.
I couldn't find anyone at first, and then I saw this girl running around in the field. Looked over the wall and saw this boy. He said his first words to her was, "I'm a famous drummer and I've lost my arm." So I got a handkerchief and some towels and just pressed on, and the clots were starting to form around the area which had been torn off. The next friendly voice over the wall was Anthony, and I just looked up and said, "Oh, thank God, Anthony. Can you find his arm?"
I crawled inside the car that was upturned, and there I found, underneath the actual dashboard, the chap's arm that had been severed from here right the way through. It was quite some distance to be thrown from any vehicle.
Yes.
That he survived was quite honestly a miracle.
Rick was rushed to the hospital, where a surgical team performed an emergency 4-hour operation in which doctors reconnected Rick's severed limb. Still, it would be days before they would know if the operation was successful.
New Year's Eve, of all days, around about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, I got a call from Peter Mensch, our manager, explaining what had happened. It just didn't sink in.
He said, Rick's had a car crash, he's lost his arm. Now, this is not in the agenda. This doesn't make sense.
You forget about him being a drummer, you forget about him being a band member, you're worried whether the guy's actually going to live.
Could see his hand, and it was so pink, and I thought, you know, they've done it.
But, to everyone's horror, Rick's reattached limb became infected. Reluctantly, the surgeons removed his left arm, this time for good.
It's almost like giving you something back and then taking it away for the second time. It seemed very, very cruel.
That was one sort of slight hiccup. And then the thing that really got to me was when they said that if I didn't clear this infection up, that there was a real possibility that I might lose my right arm as well. And that's when things got all dark and serious again. It was like, oh, no way.
In 1984, Def Leppard's bad luck had taken a brutal twist with the near-fatal car crash of their drummer Rick Allen. But Rick refused to accept the idea that his terrible injury would end his musical career. He resolved to play the drums again.
Me and Steve seeing him in hospital, and he was all done up like a mummy, you know, it was like, you know, blood seeping out, and just laying in the bed, and he said, "I've been practicing, I'm going to play drums." And we're like, I mean, it was almost the first thing he said. We thought, it's medication.
Things were exciting again. Things were really, you know, kind of, I've got a goal. I've got a goal in life. I've got something to work towards.
Richard said that life was too easy. He was doing exactly what he wanted. He was travelling the world, and this was the kick up the backside that he needed. And I said, "Richard, it had no need to have been such a hard kick."
In a show of loyalty, the band hesitated to replace Rick Allen. They decided instead to remain on hiatus until Rick might return.
There's no way he's going to get fired. I mean, he's like a brother. He's part of the family. It's up to him to tell us that he can't play it.
With Rick in the hospital, Def Leppard returned to the studio to continue work on the Hysteria album. Then, just 6 weeks after his accident, Rick rejoined the group, determined to keep the beat with one arm.
It's very emotional when he came back. There were a lot of tears and what have you, but we locked him away in a room with a drum kit.
There's just bass drum and snare drum and a hi-hat and a stool. And he sat there working away for about 15 minutes and then he almost collapsed.
It was almost like I was running on pure adrenaline. I was just hell-bent on getting back in there and making the band happy.
While the band continued to labor in the studio, Rick spent 8 hours a day mastering a custom-built electronic drum kit that allowed him to play left-handed beats with his left foot.
It was just starting back at the basics again and realizing that the information was in my head. It just needed to be channeled somewhere else. Although I couldn't get it out here, you know, I could get it to other parts of my body.
Then, in the midst of Rick's heroic comeback, the band was invited to perform on the Monsters of Rock tour, a series of European dates that featured Ozzy Osbourne and Bon Jovi. It was to be Rick Allen's one-armed return to the concert stage.
The big test was actually going out and doing it live.
In preparation, the band planned a series of small club dates in Ireland. At Rick Allen's suggestion, drummer Jeff Rich was brought in to back him up. But traveling to the third date, Jeff Rich's flight was delayed, and he missed the start of the show. Rick Allen had to go it alone. He didn't skip a beat.
About 45 minutes into the gig, a very sheepish Jeff Rich turns up and sneaks onto his kit and joins in. Didn't even notice, and that's the highest compliment I can pay Rick for that.
After the gig, Jeff came up to me and he just said, "Well, it's been nice knowing you. I think you can do this on your own."
On August 16, 1986, at the Monsters of Rock Festival, Rick Allen made his first arena concert appearance since his accident. When Rick was introduced, the crowd exploded.
The volume nearly blew you off stage. It was frightening, the reaction that the guy got.
You're talking 70,000 people. It was extremely emotional.
Tears everywhere up there, and I've never seen anything like that. And I've never felt anything like that before. It was like I'd arrived, you know, it was brilliant.
It was one of the greatest comebacks in rock history. From that day, Rick Allen became known as the Thunder God.
It did make us a lot stronger and think about things in a different way. It's like, if he can do this after losing a limb, then how dare we moan about, oh, we can't get the bridge right in this song, or oh, I've just missed a flight to Paris, or, you know, how dare we do that?
After a 3-year tragedy-plagued recording ordeal that left the band deeply in debt, Hysteria, the band's fourth album, was finally released in August of 1987. But by then, many fans had forgotten about Def Leppard. They had been out of the limelight for far too long. The first single flopped, and early tour dates were played to half-empty houses. Deeply in debt, the band needed to sell at least 5 million albums just to break even.
And we stalled at 3. And it was like, oh, okay. Which is still great, but not good enough, unfortunately.
And then they released Pour Some Sugar on Me, and then it just went ballistic. It went absolutely ballistic. It shifted 4 million albums in 3 months. It had gone in at #1 in England. We'd finally achieved success in our home country for the first time 10 years after we'd formed.
So then we are back on tour. We come back to the States because we was in Europe, and everywhere's sold out.
What at first looked like disaster turned to triumph as Hysteria spawned 7 hit singles, sold 10 million copies in the US and nearly 15 million worldwide. Def Leppard headlined an unforgettable 13-month world tour performed in the round. Performing in the round presented new challenges for the band, but the boys dealt with the situation in their own wild way.
When you're running around trying to cover 4 sides of a stage, there comes a moment when you need a break. And so they manufactured this moment in the show whereby all the guitar players would all go underneath the stage and Joe and Rick would be left on the stage.
I'm going around the whole crowd doing this whole winding them up, getting them going.
While this is going on, underneath the stage, where Rick Savage and Phil and Steve Clark are, and all the roadies and any other guests that happen to be around, would be in there with a whole load of women.
It would be like Sodom and Gomorrah going on for 20 minutes.
Their passport into the under the stage area was they had to take their tops off and get their tits out. That was the bargain.
There would be 60 naked girls, and I mean with nothing on, you know, completely. Mothers and daughters, performing sexual acts.
Satyricon, that's what it was. Fellini's Satyricon was. These weird little sex scenes going on. Some nights it got a little crazier than others. And they would photograph all this. Inevitably, though, Rick Allen and Joe Elliott come out of it really squeaky clean because, of course, they were never below the stage. But the others were.
In October 1988, after 15 months on the road, Def Leppard concluded the Hysteria Tour in Seattle. It was to be Steve Clark's last show with the band.
I think it really hit Steve hard that this is getting harder. Every album we do is getting bigger and bigger. How the hell do we top this one? And I think that started to get to him.
Countless nights I sat with Steve Clark while he was chopping out the coke. And as he was doing it, he'd be going, "Don't tell the others. Don't tell the others."
He didn't ever want to have the band learn about it, and the band didn't want to learn about it because then they would have had to look at their own addictions.
Before the first show of the Hysteria tour, he was so desperately trying to break his fingers so he wouldn't have to go on stage the next night. He was slamming them against the marble sink in his bathroom. He was just scared to death to go on stage. He was okay after the first gig. It's the first one.
Then in late 1989, Steve Clark was found lying comatose in a gutter.
Steve was found in a coma in Minneapolis. Apparently the alcohol in his blood was double what killed John Bonham. I mean, that's astonishing.
And that's it. Next 10 years. Well, who knows what that has in store after the last 10. Car accident and things. Well, I hope we're still together. It'd be a shame if we weren't. I don't think we'll probably do another 15-month tours. We'll still be making records.
Desperately ill from years of alcohol abuse, Steve Clark was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in Minneapolis.
There is one of my best friends, in with the lamppost scratchers, the ones that talk to trees. I mean, it's... why? Why is he in here?
It was very hard to convince everyone that there was a real problem there. You know, his girlfriend at the time, Lorelei, had been telling me for like 5 years.
He had a chemical imbalance, and it was painful. Like I said, he had voices and, you know, the compulsive behavior disorder. He was scared, and he was really lonely.
Steve Clark was undoubtedly the unhappiest millionaire rock star I ever met in my life.
You can't sell 12 million records and not earn any money. But it can create some very weird situations with friends and people you used to know.
I think a lot of his frustration came from the fact that he never got a pat on the back from his dad.
He loved his father, but he was scared to death of him because his father also had that mean streak where one minute he'd be happy and laughing and the next minute he wouldn't be a very nice guy.
His dad used to like getting drunk, and it was like, "Come on, son, let's go and have a drink." Even this was after Clark's been in the clinic 3 months. He never realised that Clark couldn't have 3 drinks, he had to drink 10. I don't think his family helped him. I think the fact is that Clark didn't give a He went to rehab because everybody made him.
He was home for maybe 10 days. He had to go back to work in Dublin, you know, the World Pub, and write again for the next album. So off he was, back with the band, drinking again.
In Dublin, the sessions for the band's 5th album, Adrenalize, were constantly interrupted by repeated attempts to help Steve.
I mean, we basically made Malvin, our tour manager, live with him to keep an eye on him.
You know, I'd stand there and tell him, "Steve, I love you. Please don't do this. Please don't do this, because you're hurting, you know, you can hurt me as much as you like, but you're hurting yourself big time and full time."
He went into rehab in Dublin, and for 1 month they needed family member to be there. And once a week I went in and basically just tried to make him feel bad. And he'd just sit there in his boiler suit, picking his nails, not even hearing a word I was saying. And then at the end of it he'd say, "Thanks for coming." And he'd been there for a month, and then the day he checks out, he goes straight to the pub and gets blind drunk and falls down.
Painfully aware that their efforts to help Steve help himself were futile, the band attempted one last desperate tactic.
So we gave him a 6-month leave of absence. Why don't you just go back to your house? He'd bought this house in Chelsea in London. Why don't you go back to your house, chill out, write songs, demo them, do whatever you like, you know, get up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but get well.
He was relieved and happy to be given the chance and the space. And it was a little bit of relief, I have to admit, on our point of view, from our point of view as well.
And of course the 6 months never never relaxed.
There was a point in there where I called his parents and I said, you need to help him.
He came on for Christmas 1990. We could see that he was really looking worse for wear. But I had words with him. If he carried on drinking like this, he'd kill himself. And he said, oh, well, I'm not bothered anyway.
And by now he was mixing Valiums, Prozacs, alcohol, Coke, whatever anybody would give him. And his heart was just, you know, beating, trying so hard to stay alive. But really he was really slowly trying to kill himself. And when you combined all that pain with the Prozac and the alcohol and the cocaine and the Valiums and the stress, I think his little heart just gave out, and I think he died of a broken heart.
Steve Clark died in his sleep at his home in London on January 8, 1991. He was 30 years old. An autopsy ruled his death due to compression of the brainstem from excessive alcohol mixed with antidepressants and painkillers.
I really miss him every time the show starts. I go home to Sheffield at least once a year, usually at Christmas time. I go up to his grave and I sit there for a little while with him. I'm not that spiritually inclined, but I do it for him.
Initial thing was like, don't want to do this no more, it's not the same.
Why are we doing this anyway? It's kind of supposed to be fun, right?
It didn't take us long to actually understand. Steve wouldn't wanted us to do that at all. He'd have said, carry on.
Living with the ghost of Steve Clark, the band returned to the studio to complete Adrenalize.
We wanted to finish the album off as a 4-piece. Just out of human respect to Steve and his family.
We'd worked all these guitar parts out, so I had to play his parts like him. I had to sit down and that was really strange. It was like the ghost, you know, it's like, well, there he is.
It's very real. Studios and music are escapism, and real life intrudes enormously when people in the band die.
The idea of getting someone else was weird. It's like a replacement. It's like, how do you replace someone? You don't replace a family member, you know, and you can't. We talked about it for ages and we ended up getting Vivian.
We'd known Viv for a while. We knew him as a person. That was so important.
It's a lot more to do with being able to work with people than necessarily being, you know, an Olympian athlete at your instrument, you know.
You know, he may not look like Steve, he may not play like Steve, but he fits in perfectly.
Vivian Campbell made his major concert debut when Def Leppard joined Brian May and the members of Queen for the Freddie Mercury Concert of Life at Wembley Stadium.
I was just blown out of my seat, you know, I had no idea the impact that they were going to make. I'd never seen the place sort of rise as one man to its feet. It was incredible. Joe has all the answers. He said to me, he said, Brian, this is a long time ago, he said, I figure you can be a rock and roll star as long as you keep your hair and you don't get fat, right? Do you want to get right?
Greeted with the usual mix of critical disdain and public delight, the band's 5th album, Adrenalize, debuted at #1 in the spring of 1992. The following tour carried none of the baggage of the touring past. They were a lean, mean rockin' machine. In mid-1993, they were given a hero's welcome by their hometown of Sheffield and staged a standing room only performance at Don Valley Stadium. Def Leppard had ridden an enormous wave of success for 15 years and 7 albums, but were about to enter a period of uncertainty at the end of the 90s as the musical climate around them dramatically changed.
The problem with the late 90s is that it wasn't cool to be Def Leppard.
Grunge was king, so we knew we had to do something different.
Whole different approach, you know, live backing track and just like live drums. Everything that was coming out of Seattle was really vital sounding.
They came up with slang as a kind of response to the Nirvanas, the Pearl Jams of this world.
They were consciously saying, we're going to leave what we did behind.
We had to strip back down to 0 on that record. It wasn't a case of trying to copy Pearl Jam or Nirvana. It was more a case of like not copying ourselves.
I don't think it was a mistake recording slang the way we did.
I mean, admittedly, it didn't sell at the same rate as the previous albums.
I remember thinking, we're spending a fortune here and nobody's going to buy this record.
Listening to Slang with the record company in London, it was like somebody had just farted.
No matter what we did, there was going to be a backlash.
The Slang album had failed to catch the mood and also disappointed those fans who preferred the classic Leppard sound. Audiences began to drift away.
The crowds kind of disappeared, and it was just very uncool to like what we did.
In an effort to get back on track, they released Euphoria in 1999.
So we went back into the studio and Sav suggested, you know what, let's make a classic, typical Def Leppard sounding record. In fact, let's go the whole hog and let's make the artwork look, you know, akin to the 80s records, and let's have a title that ends in IA, like Pyromania Hysteria.
There was an acceptance that we were back and it was a good record.
It went gold, and Promises was kind of like a radio hit.
It reached 11 on the Billboard chart, and they celebrate the millennium with a 147-date world tour. It looked as if Def Leppard were on their way up again. On September 5th, 2000, they were inducted by Queen's Brian May into the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And refreshed by a well-earned break, they were now confident enough to go in another new direction with their 2002 album, X.
I, as a hard rock fan, was not a fan of the album.
But hardcore fans nonetheless sent it to 11 on the Billboard chart.
By the time we got round to doing the X record, we ended up going more pop.
We wanted to have hit songs, the same sort of success that we'd experienced with Pyromania and Hysteria. Who can blame us?
I do think that at that time, we wanted to be all things to all people.
Def Leppard has always wrestled with somewhat of an identity issue.
The new pop direction was again a step too far for most fans, and it quickly dropped out of the charts. But on July 2nd, 2005, they join a host of contemporaries and support the campaign against world poverty, performing at Philadelphia's leg of the Live 8 Festival.
It's a fantastic honour, and you're on the bill with so many famous people, and that in itself is just a buzz.
I remember Joe getting word from the side of the stage that there was 1,200,000 people actually in front of the stage.
Hopefully creating awareness for a better world and to be part of it.
But could they keep rebuilding their audience? Leppard's next album, Yeah, in 2006, was again a surprise. It was a homage to all the bands they had grown up with and had been inspired by.
Bowie, Bolan, Alice Cooper, Mott the Hoople. God, yeah, I could just go on forever, you know. These songs were the soundtrack of our lives. British pop from the 70s. That's what inspired us. That's what made us want to pick a guitar up.
No matter what you do,
we wanted to be on MTV, Top of the Pops, American Bandstand, show off, do the splits jump, do backwards somersaults, scream, leap, whatever, wear silly, sparkly jackets.
We were like, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good album. Unfortunately, it didn't get terribly good reviews. In fact, one review was just one word: no.
Although the album didn't perform well on the charts, it hit the right note with the fans. They wanted to see Def Leppard perform again.
By the time 2006 came along, you were no longer promoting a record by touring, you were promoting a tour by releasing an album. And the Yeah album gave us the biggest tour that we've done since the Hysteria tour.
Long overdue recognition came in May 2006 when VH1 made them inaugural inductees in their spectacular Rock Honors event.
To be up on stage with Brian May doing 20th Century Boy with us, It's the thing of legend for us. It's dream come true. So.
I think on that particular night, rock was definitely ours.
While on their last tour, the band had introduced a makeshift recording studio backstage so that no opportunity would be wasted when inspiration struck. They called this studio the Sparkle Lounge.
We'd made a decision to try and piece together the next album while we were on the road.
It was exciting, spontaneous, and it was not us sitting around for a year going, well, what do we do again?
And on that particular tour in 2006, the 82 shows we did in the States, we were probably in that room 50 times. So by the time we got to the studio, most of those songs, we had them down. We knew what they were called, we knew the arrangements, the tempos, and it made the recording that much quicker.
The album marked a welcome return to the Def Leppard of old, and fans made it a top 5 record.
Sparkle Lounge is, if anything, as classic a Leppard album as you can possibly get.
But with the record's success came the call for more live shows. As they embark on a massive world tour for the first time in their 30-year history, the demands of life on the road forced Leppard to cancel shows. Was the rock and roll lifestyle finally catching up with them?
The downside of doing what we do is everybody wants you to keep being 21.
Are you
Once famous for their hard-drinking rock and roll excess, members of the band now seem to have changed their ways.
We've dipped our toe into every part of this industry. Sex, drugs, rock and roll.
There comes a point where you have a responsibility, first and foremost, to the people that are paying good money to come and see you.
None of the guys in Def Leppard are kids anymore. They have kids. So it's a different mentality and a different approach out on the road.
We travel with a trainer, a masseuse, we have a juice bar.
Rock and roll tea parties. You have to eat healthy, you have to work out, you have to raise your game because the competition's outrageous.
Have you lost your touch?
In spite of all the trauma and tragedy, Def Leppard have been together for over 30 years as a band. To this day, talent, determination, and stamina remain their tools for survival, and they continue to have their dreams and ambitions.
Inevitably, in the rock world, things come around again, you know, and Leppard's time is coming around again.
There's so much life experience tied up in this band. I guess the thing that we had on our side was the fact that we stuck together.
We've always wanted to be the best that we can be.
We're so much better as musicians, songwriters, producers, so there's no reason why we can't actually fulfill that ambition.
I've been in this band more than half of my life, and it's just second nature.
Lyrically, they write terrific songs. They have great hooks, great melodies. I think most other bands would love to do Leppard cast-offs if they could.
They're regarded, rightfully so, as one of the key acts to come out of the 80s.
Hysteria is one of the best-selling records of all time, and in total they have sold over 65 million albums. Def Leppard have more than earned their place in rock and roll history.
In the ultimate book of rock, my ambition is to shove us closer to page 3. Get us down the front, up there with the Pink Floyds and the Zeppelins and the Who and the Stones and the Beatles. Whether we ever achieve that,